For my talk today, I want to outline specific steps that the US government must ask of India, especially as India takes on an increased priority in Washington as part of the Quad. The US Congress and the Biden administration has an essential role to play in this, and it's vital that they are fully aware of the crucial time in US-India relations and press Prime Minister Modi while he is here in the United States this week. It's a perfect opportunity. They should not miss it. The US government should press Modi to repeal and amend laws that jeopardize human rights and to reform the overbroad legal frameworks that authorities have used to target activists, opposition leaders, and human rights defenders. In fact, as John mentioned, Amnesty International India was one of those that was targeted using the Enforcement Directorate, which is an agency of the central government, in a series of raids over the course of several years, culminating in our closure in September 2020. The Prime Minister should hear from President Biden about the grave concerns raised about the discriminatory, arbitrary, capricious National Register of Citizens in Assam. And furthermore, in Assam, in the past few days, we have seen the recently re-elected Assam state government carry out a drive to forcibly evict hundreds of households in a town in Assam. Most of those displaced in this outrageous demolition of homes are Muslims of Bengali origin. India is historically viewed by the US government as a key ally and strategic partner of the US and as a regional example of the rule of law. The perceptions, however, have been increasingly undermined by the Indian government's misuse of the police and the judiciary to punish dissent and facilitate violations of human rights. Again, I reiterate that the Biden administration has the perfect opportunity this week to convey its displeasure over these human rights violations and to ask Prime Minister Modi to end these violations immediately. In particular, the central government has weaponized laws purporting to be, quote unquote, anti-terrorist, such as the Foreign Contributions Regulation Act, known as the FCRA, and the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, UAPA, using these laws against human rights defenders, activists, and religious minorities. An amendment passed in September 2020 to the Foreign Contributions Regulation Act, which regulates foreign income for NGOs, has been criticized by human rights groups as a tool to suppress and constrain India's amazingly vibrant civil society. The amendment actually dramatically reduces the ability of NGOs and civil society organizations in the country to access foreign funds by prohibiting sub-granting, and it requires recipients to open State Bank of India accounts, as well as mandates pre-authorization of fund transfers. The FCRA prohibits the use of foreign funds to support activities that might endanger, quote unquote, the public interest, the economic interest, or security of India. These are terms that allow for inconsistent, arbitrary application of the law and place at high risk persecution of groups and organizations that have been critical of the government. And so while the FCRA has been used to undermine organizations in a financial way, the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, the UAPA, is one of many laws that allows Indian authorities to target individual activists, protesters, human rights defenders, and religious minorities. It's just one of many. There's also sedition laws from the British era, during the colonial era. There are other laws during the colonial era, but this one has been used with increasing frequency. The UAPA compromises the right to a free trial by restricting the right to bail and extending the length of time suspects can be detained without trial. And the problem is that people will be in prison awaiting time, and they may not be released for months or years after, only to be acquitted of charges or charges being dropped years down the line. Meanwhile, their lives are destroyed by being in jail, awaiting trial on often trumped up charges. It is a tool of harassment used to target, intimidate, and imprison those who are critical of the government. Slow investigative processes and stringent bail provisions have allowed Indian authorities to detain those who have been accused of laws for years. And so that's what's been happening. It's been happening with increasing frequency as well in the aftermath of the violence in Delhi that was stoked by a series of hate speeches given by politicians shortly before and during previous President Trump's visit to India in January 2020. So in practice, both laws have had a devastating impact on Indian civilians, civil society, and human rights. The FCRA has resulted in catastrophic disruptions for access for humanitarian organizations that were working with local NGOs and other organizations during the devastating second wave of the COVID-19 back in the spring and early summer in India, which left many lakhs of people dead. Among those lost during this time was Father Stan Swamy, who was an 84-year-old human rights defender with Parkinson's disease, who had been jailed with advanced Parkinson's under the UAPA and whom Indian authorities refused to release despite widespread outcry as part of the jailing of other Bhima Koregaon activists. These Bhima Koregaon activists, as well as journalists and even politicians, have had their phones and computers targeted by malware, which the company that produces the malware says can only be bought by governments. The Biden administration and members of Congress must underscore to Modi that the Indian government's use of these purportedly, quote unquote, anti-terrorist laws to crush opposition and target activists undermines the strategic partnership with the United States. There needs to be a political cost to the Modi government's continued efforts to erode and abuse India's political and legal institutions to violate human rights. A government that misuses its own anti-terrorism laws to shore up political power, extinguish dissent, and target minorities is not a reliable security partner. Okay. The US should insist to Modi that a strong India-US partnership depends on the Indian government's urgent repeal or amendment of these repressive laws. Thank you.